Sure. Hopefully, we don't have conflicting opinions here, but I'd say that I'd say that I think you're exactly right, because many of the entry-level roles are not in sustainability. We don't usually put entry-level PhDs into tech scouting roles. That comes with some experience, right? Because you have to kind of know the organization and know the company. And so I would say if you have those interests, then certainly use the typical entry route, which is a PhD research scientist, either in product or process R&D, and then just look for ways to develop yourself. Actually, first of all, establish credibility in that role, and then I think you gain the credibility and the opportunities open up. Okay, so I think for most companies, I don't know, but in Dow, it's unlikely that you would come in from the outside with just a fresh PhD and go into a tech scout role.
Alvita can breathe easy because I agree completely. I think you have to start at the bench, as Alvita said, establish credibility, achieve some accomplishments, so that when people talk to you and you say, this is what I want to do, I want to do technology scouting, that people will take you seriously. Procter & Gamble, one of the companies I consult for, has a number, over 24 former bench chemists. These are people that have gotten 1 or 2 promotions, worked their way up, have significant achievements, and are now what most folks would call technology scouts.
And that's probably for other roles too. So we have a lot of people that come in and say, I want to be a manager, I don't want to be at the bench. Well, the reality is you've got to be at the bench before you can lead the people who are at the bench. And so I think the answer is the same there as well for other roles.
So this is directed at the folks in industry. Can you speak to opportunities for theorists in industry and what the best way to think about that avenue for your career would be?
Did you say purist?
Theorist.
Oh, theorist. There are actually quite a few opportunities in industry. They are more along the lines, though, of being a bit more practically inclined than like quantum mechanical theory. But you could be looking at things like computer simulation of chemical processes in a manufacturing plant. What design reactor? What should the geometry be? What should the feed rates be? How many points should reactants be introduced into a reaction chamber? How do you control the heat evolution? All these kinds of things are computer simulation that rely on the skills that a theoretical chemist quite often develops in graduate school. If the same is true if you were a petroleum engineer. You know, a lot of oil companies, some of their oil fields exist only inside of computers. And they experiment to produce oil and gas from those fields more productively using the very basic knowledge of how fluids move in permeable media. So there are definitely roles for theoreticians in industry, but don't expect them to be the exact type of theory that you worked on in grad school.
Just ditto. Yeah, I mean, I'll just say as a leader of recruiting, I mean, we certainly hire people that are theorists. We certainly hire modelers. They're obviously fewer than the experimentalists, obviously, but we do hire them, so there are some, and you just have to be aware of them and be looking for them.
I'm still trying to hopefully stumble serendipitously upon what I want my career path to be, and I'm just assuming that part of that is going to be getting a lucrative postdoc position. And most of you, well, I mean, I guess lucrative in terms of experience and that, I guess, not necessarily money, but most of you had what sounded like very good postdoc positions, and I was wondering, how do you get them?
I'm sorry, am I delegating?
So in my experience and kind of what I've seen, I think that a postdoc position, or postdoc, people pick much more based on the area of research. Whereas grad school, at least for me, I picked it based on kind of the location and the institution, and there being several faculty, that I might be interested in working for. But I feel like with postdocs, you apply to individual groups and professors. I think establishing what area that is, and then kind of networking, which I think several people talked about, go to scientific meetings and approach the people that you might like to consider for postdocs. Maybe talk to their students, talk to them, and express an interest in their research, find out the process for applying for a postdoc in their lab, and just put yourself out there. Does that answer your question, sort of, or do you have a more specific question?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure how. The only way to get job experience as a graduate student that's just graduated is to get a postdoc. So it's just important to get good experience in that 1 or 2 years before trying to go into industry or academia or whatever.
Right. So I guess just on my experience, at the time I was applying, I wanted to go into the pharmaceutical industry, and that is very heavily organic synthesis based, so I wanted to do total synthesis for my postdoc. So that's really just what I looked at when I was applying. And I wanted to go to one particular institution because for family considerations. So I was very narrowly focused. But those are the same types of considerations that would come into play just based on your priorities.
From the view, my question kind
I'll
of
address.
follows along with that. But from the view of academia, we can see the value of postdocs. I was just wondering about, from the view of industry, the value of postdocs when you're looking at people applying. Like, would you rather them have something in a different area so they have a better breadth of knowledge? Like, from just the view of furthering your career into an industry setting, not just an academia setting, is a postdoc valuable? And if so, what qualities?
Okay, you used a critical word there, and that was breadth. I think there are two strategies to pursuing a postdoc. One is greater depth in whatever field you work in on your PhD, and not stray too far from that. The other is to expand your chemistry horizons and, in essence, sort of start from scratch in a new field. And that's what I did in my postdoc, and I was also fortunate in that while I was doing physical organic chemistry, studying organic reaction mechanisms, I had to do a lot of organic synthesis for both my PhD and my postdoc projects. And that set me up very well for doing synthetic organic chemistry in industry, yet still having a feel for how to do things like increase reaction rates, increase reaction yield. So I definitely go for the breadth, and whether it's valuable or not in terms of the industrial mindset in hiring you, the hiring manager's mindset, really depends on the postdoc. I don't think more of the same really would impress a hiring manager, but somebody that moved out, expanded their focus, has already shown versatility. You're going to need versatility in an industrial career, whether you stay at the bench or not.
Yeah, I agree with John here. I don't, as the person in charge of hiring for Dow, I don't have the exact data, but I'd say certainly we don't require a postdoc. And we probably hire probably 85% of the folks are freshly minted PhDs. So I say that, whether or not you do a postdoc, really, to John's point, it really does depend, right? So we've had some PhD candidates where it's clear that they would benefit from a postdoc for whatever reason. Maybe it's the area of research they've been in, maybe it's the breadth of experience they've had, maybe it's the lack of publications. And so There are some cases where we might recommend a postdoc. There are others where people have really strong publication records. They've got good, relevant research experience to come into Dow and do a great job. And so there really is no bias from our perspective when we go after PhD or postdoctoral candidates. What we're really looking for is the best candidate, and that may come in the form of a freshly minted PhD. It may come in the form of a postdoc. We also don't do what we call slot hiring. So I'm not looking for somebody to go get a postdoc in a very specific thing so that they can come into Dow and work specifically on that. Because when we, in the context of this discussion on career paths, the reality is you're not going to be doing the same thing. And even if you start in Dow doing something similar, the reality is a few years later you'll be doing something different. And so it does depend. It depends on the individuals. And I just stop there.
Okay, a question from the front.
I have a question for Sylvia. I actually have 2 questions for you. First off, I'm currently an undergraduate, and I was wondering how taking a gap year between undergraduate and graduate school affected the application process for graduate school, and if you think it was harder to get in, or if it was better, like, to give you like a jump start into like research right away once you took your year.
So the question was, so I took that year off between when I was working at the company and before I started graduate school, and how that affected the application process. And basically what I did was I applied, visited graduate schools, decided where I wanted to go, and then deferred my enrollment for a year. So in that sense, it worked out well, I thought. So I kind of knew where I was going, headed off to do my fun thing, but had a definite endpoint as to kind of when I had to come back to the real world. And what was the second part of your question?
Okay, so my second question was in reference to JACS and just scientific publications. I was wondering if you were a chemistry major interested kind of into aspects of journalism, but you wanted to go into like the more popular scientific journalism, so like Scientific American or Popular Science. I was wondering if they ever had like communications with JACS, and if you got your degree in chemistry, if you knew anything about routes to take for like this more popular form of scientific journalism.
Okay. Okay, so the question related to kind of more popular science journalism, so Scientific American, Popular Science. And the first part is whether the primary literature, so journals like JACS, have any type of relationship or communication with those types of magazines. And the answer to that is not very much. You know, so Popular Science occasionally puts together, say, top 10 lists of, you know, top chemists working in a certain area or top scientists working in a certain area. And they might contact the editorial office for some input, but it's pretty informal. They're doing that to, I think, a lot of top scientific journals and get input wherever they can get it. So that's really the extent of that interaction. In terms of if you have an interest in science journalism as a scientist and then how you might pursue that, you're getting some experience with writing. So maybe the campus newspaper, you might be able to you know, start out writing an article, first doing it for free, you know, saying, hey, look, I reported on this, and you know, I'd like to submit it. And then that might become a more regular thing, and you can kind of establish yourself as a science writer that way. There are also, I think John mentioned freelancing. You know, that's something that would be a way to get experience as well. And it's, you know, I'm not that familiar with it, so I don't know how easy it is to become established, but, you know, starting small and working your way up might be a way to go. I don't know if you have.
Yeah, I think if you're still in school and you still have a semester or more ahead of you, I would take a look at taking a journalism course as an elective. And I don't say a science writing course or a technical writing course from a chemistry department. The journalism is communicating more with the general public rather than with scientists. And it sounds like that's what you're interested in. And then there are many schools of journalism to go to graduate school too there are a handful of ones that specialize in science journalism, and perhaps the best known is University of California, Santa Cruz. You might have heard of them. Met one of their graduates, but one or two are on the CNN staff. And that's another approach. Another is, what I did basically was I developed some credibility as a scientist before I really left the world of research journals and began writing about science, both for engineers who weren't scientists and for the general public. But whether you work for a publication or whether you work for as a freelancer, self-employed, where you get an article idea and try to sell it to an editor, it's very competitive. And as I say, I started out doing it part-time. That was great because I was still getting a paycheck while I was making my mistakes.
Okay, we have time for one more question, so the honor goes to you.
I just want to ask a little bit, I guess, about globalization of maybe the industry. Like, I wonder how important is being able to, or having international experience, like going abroad, and also being able to speak different languages. Have you been noticing expansion in that respect in the industry, and I don't know, how would it affect the future?
Well, my best friend from graduate school, and this is more than a few years ago now, but he went to work for a small American company in flavor and fragrance chemicals. And Bob did great in German, and he kept up his German, both speaking and written translation capabilities. His firm was taken over by Roche, the huge drug company that is in the German-speaking part of Switzerland. And they had a division that did flavor and fragrance chemistry. And Bob started out at the bench. He was probably about equivalent to me several years later when his company was taken over. But because of his fluency in German, guess who was always sent to the big corporate meetings? In Switzerland. And guess who got the 1 year or 2 year assignments in the home base in Switzerland? That was Bob. He is now a senior vice president of research for a company called Givaudan, which is the former Roche flavor and fragrances chemical operation. So foreign language skills are very important, and a lot of international students who come here to study, and that English being a second language is a bit of a challenge for them in terms of developing communication skills. But on the other hand, they bring the language from their homeland to this country and potentially to American companies in areas where American firms and British firms are expanding like crazy, like in China and India. So it would be a real advantage in those areas. And, I wish I could remember her name, but there's an ACS counselor that wrote an article on international careers for chemists about 2 years ago. And her name just won't come to me off the top of my head, so it happens maybe when you get old. But anyway, and both she and her husband have rotated around, and I'm pretty sure she was down. Pretty sure she was down, but I can't, not for the life of me. Remember the name? They'll come to me about midnight tonight. 50,000. Anyone else?
All right. I guess with that, if we can just give everybody another round of applause. Thank you to all of our